Welcome and introduce Judge Meer as our guest speaker this afternoon, the Judge President of the Land Claims Court of South Africa. So this is the last in the Women's Seminar series that the Bridge Group has hosted in conjunction with the General Counsel of the Bar and Advocates for Transformation, all under the banner of the 100 More campaign. And that's the campaign that marks 100 years since women were permitted entry into the legal profession. And really what we're seeking to do is to celebrate this milestone, to acknowledge what women have achieved over the last 100 years, to support and inspire each other, and to accelerate the progress of women in law. This afternoon, Judge Meer is going to talk to us about the pioneering women who fought and struggled for the rights of all of us, and who were the trailblazers that really allowed us to be where we are today. And this is quite fitting because Judge Meer comes from a family of activists and trailblazers. She comes from a family that in fact holds an iconic place in the history of the struggle in South Africa. So Judge Meer's father was Ishmael Meer, who was a prominent lawyer and anti-apartheid activist, and was in the 1960s arrested and charged with treason alongside Nelson Mandela and other activists. Judge Meer's mother, Professor Fatima Meer, was an academic, an author, and an activist. She was one of the founding members of the Federation of South African Women that spearheaded the historic march to the Union Buildings in 1956. And Fatima Meer was, in fact, one of the key leaders of that historic march in 1956. Judge Meer has continued her family's legacy through her work as a public interest lawyer and in her career on the judiciary. Judge Meer has a BA from what was then the University of Durban-Westville, an LLB from UCT, and then an LLM from the University of Warwick in the UK. Prior to her judicial career, Judge Meer practiced as a public interest lawyer at the LRC, and she was Deputy National Director of the Legal Resources Centre and also Acting National Director of the LRC for a time. She was appointed as a judge of the Land Claims Court in 1997, and then as a judge of the Western Cape High Court in 2004. And Judge Meer has been the acting judge president of the Land Claims Court since 2011. Judge Meer's jurisprudence covers a broad range of issues, and what is striking in her jurisprudence is the commitment that one sees to the enhancement of human rights and women's rights. And one of the highlights is perhaps the My Vote Counts judgment, which Judge Meer turned around and incredibly quickly in the Western Cape High Court in September 2017, ruling that information about private funding of political parties was reasonably required for the exercise of the right to vote. That judgment was confirmed by the Court a year later. Judge Meer has also been an extraordinary professor of the University of Stellenbosch since 2017. Now, it's particularly special for me personally to be hosting Judge Meer this evening. My very first job after university was a researcher at the then newly established Land Claims Court in 1998. As a young woman in my 20s, I was in awe of all the judges and particularly of the sole woman judge on the court. And as the years went by, I appeared in the Land Claims Court, and then I served as an assessor, and then I served as an acting judge. And a few years ago, Judge Meer and I, together with an assessor, presided over a big restitution case in the Eastern Cape. It was the Fish River Sun case, which was heard largely in Port Alfred and Kenton-on-Sea, and it was quite an amazing experience. And throughout all these iterations of my career, Judge Meer has been a teacher for me. She's been wise and patient and an incredibly warm teacher. And it's really difficult to express how much you have taught me about the law, about judicial temperament, about integrity. You really have been an incredible mentor to me. So thank you. And thank you so much for making the time to be here. And it really is an honor to host you this afternoon. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Heidi, for those incredibly kind and generous words. I hardly recognized myself. And can I just say how much of a pleasure it is to be here today, not only because of the special relationship I have with Heidi, who was our very first, and may I say, excellent law researcher, but also because it's important to celebrate the centenary of women becoming legal practitioners, and gatherings like this, where we pay tribute to this important event, are important. I'm going to speak to you a little bit about the trailblazing women without whom we wouldn't be here today. So let's start off by understanding the legislation a little bit. On 10 April 2023, the Women Legal Practitioners Act 7 of 1923, as we know, was promulgated by publication befittingly in a government gazette extraordinary, and it was extraordinary. The act is short and succinct. It states, women shall be entitled to be admitted to practice and be enrolled as advocates, attorneys, notaries, public, or conveyancers in any province of the Union, subject to the same terms and conditions as apply to men, and any law in force in any province of the Union regulating the admission or enrollment of persons as advocates, attorneys, notaries, public or conveyancers shall henceforth be interpreted accordingly. Sitting here today, it seems ridiculous, absurd, nonsensical, and abhorrent, and indeed it is all of these, that as recently as 100 years ago, women were not allowed into the legal profession. For we are today everywhere in the profession, and we have brought our particular wisdom and experience to bear in enriching and shaping it. At the historical commemorative sitting of the Pretoria High Court in April this year to mark 100 years, whilst the rise of women in the profession was celebrated, the challenges facing women practitioners were aptly acknowledged. Challenges of insufficient women in leadership positions, insufficient briefs to women, insufficient representation of women in high-profile cases, harassment in the workplace, gender inequalities in hiring, and lack of accommodation for family responsibilities, to name a few. If these are challenges faced today, where the idea of women in the profession is commonplace, one cannot even begin to imagine the courage and fortitude which prompted those trailblazing women who took on the system, broke their glass ceilings, and paved the way for us in the profession today. It is about these women that I want to talk, and these women whom I wish to pay tribute to. It all began in 1909 with Miss Sonia Schlesien, the applicant in Schlesien versus Incorporated Law Society of 1909, TS 363. Miss Schlesien, who was articled to a newly arrived lawyer in South Africa, Mohandas Gandhi, later to become the world famous and revered Mahatma Gandhi, sought to be admitted as an attorney in 1909. Her application, which was opposed by the Law Society, was refused. Bristow J. reasoning that the word attorney referred to people of that class who have always been capable of being attorneys, namely men, and Miss Schlesien was ordered to pay the Law Society's costs. Sonia Schlesien was a remarkable, highly intelligent and courageous woman. Little is known about her, although I'm happy to see that in the latest publication of The Advocate, there is a comprehensive article about her. Her story is a fascinating, interesting, and intriguing one, much of which I have got from Wikipedia. Born in 1888 to a Jewish family in Moscow, she emigrated with her family to South Africa in 1892. By the age of 15, she had matriculated, and at age 17, she was recommended by an architect, Herman Kallenbach, for a secretarial job with a new immigrant Indian lawyer, Mohandas Gandhi. By her early 20s, she had become entrusted with the executive decision-making in Gandhi's law practice and Gandhi's socio-political movements. Gandhi said during the Satyagraha days, she led the movement single-handed. Satyagraha is a policy of passive political resistance advocated by Gandhi, based on non-violent resistance or civil resistance based on truth. In 1908, in opposition to the Restriction Act, which added to the legal discrimination statutes, Ms. Schlesien wrote a speech for herself to give to some 2,500 protesters and asked her parents for permission to deliver it. In the end, it was Gandhi who delivered the speech, but it was her speech which challenged the people to give up all, aye, very life itself, for the noble cause of country and religion. Her dedication to Gandhi and his work went beyond the risks that she was taking as a Jewish white woman working for an immigrant man from India. It is said that the support to Gandhi of her and Kallenbach was instrumental due to their ability to capitalize on their white credentials to muster support from the greater Anglo community, while further using the same status as protection from arrest and prosecution. Sonia Schlesien was a lifelong friend of Gandhi and would have been a fellow lawyer had she not been female. After Gandhi left South Africa, Ms. Schlesien, funded initially by a loan that Gandhi had arranged, earned a Bachelor's and Master's of Arts, respectively, in first class from the University of Witwatersrand. Thereafter, she became a well-respected but eccentric teacher of Latin at a high school in Krugersdorp for over 20 years. Despite this, she was never promoted, and this might have been due to frictions with her faculty authorities. She enrolled at the University of Natal in 1953 to study law, but did not complete due to ill health. She died in Johannesburg in 1956, and her ashes were placed in a wall of remembrance at Braamfontein Cemetery. Gandhi wrote of her in glowing terms in his autobiography, noting her ability to work night and day without prejudice or favor, saying, "She worked unescorted and asked for little reward, and during the Satyagraha days, almost every one of the leaders was in jail, and she led the movement single-handed." A huge loss and missed opportunity for the legal profession. Sonia Schlesien would have been a formidable and dedicated member of the profession. A few years after Sonia Schlesien's application was refused, Madeline Wookey, a young articled clerk at the firm Fairbridges in Cape Town, suffered the same fate. In Incorporated Law Society versus Wookey, 1912 AD 623, Acting Chief Justice Rose Innes, in setting aside the decision of the CPD to admit Ms. Wookey, held that where the law referred to persons being admitted as attorneys, it referred only to male persons. He also cautioned against opening to a host of new competitors the doors of an already congested profession. This after the CPD had held that there was no positive law in South Africa prohibiting the admission of women. Sadly, I was unable to find any further information about Ms. Wookey. She too is, notwithstanding, a trailblazer in the path of women to enter the profession, as were it not for her application, together with that of Sonia Schlesien, the law might not have changed. The Schlesien and Wookey cases were followed by some obnoxious outpourings, as is observed by Patrick Bracker in a De Rebus article. The article being "The Slow Rise of Women in the Legal Profession." He refers to an article by Davis, later Mr. Justice Davis, endorsing a US judgment to the effect that the profession of law clashed with the law of nature, which destines and qualifies the female sex for the bearing and nurturing of children. Not to be outdone, the former Chief Justice of the Orange Free State, Melius de Villiers, in an equally prejudiced article, Women and the Legal Profession, 1918 SALJ, said, "A revolt against nature is involved in any proposal to allow women to enter the legal profession." Notwithstanding these views, and I dare say surprisingly for the Parliament of the time, the prevailing misogyny was ignored. And in 1923, the Women's Legal Practitioners Act was promulgated, some say prompted by the decisions handed down in Schlesing and Wookie. The first female lawyer to be admitted in South Africa was Irene Geffen. In 1923, Miss Irene Geffen was admitted to the Transvaal Bar. She is described as a Lithuanian Jewish immigrant. It is recorded that in response to a call from the International Council of Women for National Organizations to publish summaries of law affecting women and children in each country, Miss Geffen published The Laws of South Africa Affecting Women and Children in 1928. Miss Geffen, who lived in Johannesburg, went on to become the scion of one of South Africa's foremost legal families. Her younger daughter, Felicia Kentridge, an attorney, ran the legal clinic at the University of Witwatersrand and was a founder of the Legal Resources Center, at which I worked for many years. Felicia's husband and Irene Geffen's son-in-law, Sir Sidney Kentridge, is one of South Africa's and the UK's finest barrister and is indeed a household name to all of us who practice law in South Africa. The successive generations of Kentridges have also gone on to boast accomplished lawyers. The first woman to be admitted as an attorney in South Africa was Constance Mary Hall. In 1926, Miss Constance Mary Hall was admitted as an attorney, but not without a struggle. An op-ed, Women's Rights, Have They Come Full Circle, Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria, provides the following information about her. The initial registration of her articles of clerkship was refused on the grounds that she was a woman. And bear in mind, this was in 1926, 3 years after the legislation had changed. This made Miss Hall the only woman in her law class of 200 who simultaneously studied and served articles, even more determined to become admitted, a feat she ultimately achieved. She used her hard-won qualifications to good use throughout her life, being an energetic, hard-working, and committed legal practitioner and a member of various organizations, such as the League of Women's Voters, the Women's Voluntary Services, especially with regard to the legal disabilities of women, and the Penal Reform League. She died at the ripe old age of 92. The first woman of color to be admitted to the legal profession was Zainunisa Sissy Gool. Zainunisa Gool, better known as Sissy Gool, was called to the Cape Bar in 1962. Ms. Gool came from a radical background. Her father, Abdullah Abdurrahman, was a leader of the African People's Organization, and she was tutored, interestingly enough, by both Olive Schreiner and Mahatma Gandhi, as if Gandhi didn't have enough on his hands without being a tutor as well. From 1938 to 1951, Sissy Gool, as she was known, represented Cape Town's District 6 on the Cape Town City Council, and for several years was the only woman and the first Black woman serving on the City Council. In 1949, she was elected chairperson of the City Council's Health Committee, the first Black woman to serve in local government. Known as the Jewel of District 6, she represented the people of that constituency until her death in 1963, despite having been named as a communist under the Suppression of Communist Act. Ms. Gould founded the National Liberation League and helped to create the Non-European United Front. She was lauded as a civil rights leader and champion of the poor. 3 years after Sissy Gould was admitted, Desiree Finca of Umtata became in 1967 the first African woman to be admitted as an attorney after serving her articles under Godfrey Pitje, one of the few Black attorneys practicing in Johannesburg at the time. An interview with Ms. Finca on Solid Gold Podcast's Legal Trailblazers, 17 April 2021, reveals that she studied law at UNISA, inspired by Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela, both of whom were known to her. She continued practicing with Godfrey Pitje, engaged in mostly political cases. She recounts an incident when she appeared in a Free State magistrate's court. When I was ushered into court, the white magistrate looked at me like I was a mad woman. I said I am an attorney practicing in Johannesburg and showed him my certificate. He said, "There's never been a Black person appearing, let alone a Black woman." He asked for the name of a white attorney in Johannesburg who knew me. "Mr. Hellman," I said. The magistrate phoned Mr. Hellman, who vouched for her experience, and only then allowed her to proceed. Ms. Finca's law firm, Pitje and Fink, handled Mr. Robert Sobukwe's application to be admitted as an attorney upon his release from Robben Island. His application had been opposed because of his politics. She also recalls former Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke coming to the firm upon his release from Robben Island. Ms. Finca in the interview also disclosed a lesser-known fact about her, which speaks to her multi-talents. When the famous Miriam Makeba, the lead in the musical King Kong, took ill, Ms. Finca stepped in to replace Makeba as lead, taking leave of absence from her articles to do so. Ms. Finca recently honored the special sitting at the Pretoria High Court to mark the 100-year milestone with her presence. Befittingly, at that sitting, the decisions in Schlesien and Wookie were set aside, and Sonia Schlesien and Madeleine Wookie were admitted to the profession posthumously. In conclusion, a few observations on the impact women have made on legal practice. Women in the legal profession have made great strides. Women lawyers and judges, I believe, have a stronger feminist consciousness, thinking about legal issues, using a different moral voice, viewing the resolution of conflicts as a problem of care and responsibility in relationships, as opposed to the male perspective of a problem of rights and rules. All of this resonates as women have certain unique perspectives and life experiences different from those of men that ought to be represented on the bench. This is not to take away from the contributions of men, and I say this with great respect to the men who are here today. Indeed, women have brought their wisdom and grounding to the profession and have hopefully helped to humanize and demystify the law and legal practice. I think we have now reached a point where women in the legal profession are an unstoppable and formidable force, and it has taken 100 years to get here, and I have no doubt that women will continue making great strides.